Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel, and in this tutorial I'm going to be doing a video on how to paint in Photoshop. So let's get started. I'm going to start off with the workspace. I already have it set to painting, but usually when you log into Photoshop it has it set to essential, which kind of looks like this. But for today we're going to be working in painting mode. It really makes things a lot easier because you have the brush history on your right side, which allows you to redo and undo the strokes that you've done. It has the swatches and it has a navigator, so you can move around, zoom in and out. So as you can see here, I already have a sketch done. I will be doing another tutorial on how to sketch in Photoshop, but for today we're just going to focus on coloring and painting. So for the layers, I have on one of the layers the line art, which I drew, and the other layer I have some of the colors that I've already selected. I was thinking of doing purple for the hair and a golden peach color for the skin. I've selected darker shades and lighter shades. I already went ahead and created a layer underneath our line art, which is where we're going to be starting. But before we get to that, I'm going to go onto the layer with our line art and set it to darken, which will make the lines appear much more darker on top of what we paint. I'm going to have the line art set to lock mode so that we don't accidentally paint anything on that layer. So going back to the layer underneath, I am going to use the dropper tool to select the basic shade for the skin tone. Instead of manually selecting the dropper tool, you can also hold down the Alt key to pick up colors. Next, we're going to go into the brush settings. We're going to have shape dynamic and smoothing on, and using the Alt key to pick up the basic color, we're going to color in the basic color of the skin. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Next, I'm going to be creating another layer on top of this layer, and we're going to do the same thing with the hair. So using the Alt key, I'm going to pick up the color I want for the hair and fill that in. For the hair, I like using a smaller brush to go along the outside of the hair, the finer parts, and then going back in with a bigger brush to fill in the rest. It really makes things a lot easier. Next, I'm going to be creating a new layer and coloring in the color of the shirt. For this, I'm going with the purple. You can also do this on the same layer because at the end we will merge the two layers together. Next, so we're going to be working on the shading. Going back to the skin layer, I'm going to hit the button that's next to the word lock. This will just ensure that we stay within what we've already colored. I'm going to bring the opacity down a little and bring down the flow, and I'm going to be using almost an airbrush tool to add in some of the shadows. Now before we go in to do that, you want to determine where the light source is coming from, and in this case I wanted to do it as if the light was coming in from the front. So I'm just going to add some of the shadows underneath the hair, along the sides of the face, underneath the eyes, and basically anywhere where I felt like the shadows might fall. This part doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, we're just using this as a guideline. So just lightly shade in where you think the shadows might be. Next, we're going to use the Alt key and select the darker shade, and I'm going to go over and just darken up some of the shadows. Similarly, we're going to be selecting the lighter color and placing some of the highlights. Now if the light is coming from the front, most of the highlights will fall along the bridge of the nose, the apples of the cheeks, the forehead, above the upper lip, and the chin. I'm also going to be adding some highlights along the collarbone. and on the ears. Now we're going to go back in with a softer brush and we're going to use the Alt key to pick up the colors and blend in any harsh edges. Once you have all the highlights and shadows blended in together, we're going to be moving on to the hair. Now for this, I'm using a brush that is fairly hard and small. We're going to stick with a mid opacity and mid flow. Now using the Alt key, I'm going to select a darker shade than what we originally colored the hair and start adding some of the shadows. When adding shading to the hair, I start off by sectioning off the hair into locks. And then I go back in and make those locks a bit darker by adding shadows around them. Now using the Alt key, I'm going to be selecting a lighter tone for the hair and going back into the locks that I've already created and adding highlights in the center. Now I'm going back in with an even darker shade and just darkening up the shadows that I've already created and enhancing the locks. Next, I'm going to be taking an even lighter color and adding lighter highlights towards the center of the locks that I've created. Most of the highlights will go on top of the hair and the hair framing the face. Now I'm going to go back and blend in all the shadows and highlights together. Again, I use the Alt key to pick up colors and blend them in together. Once I have everything blended together, I'm going to decrease the size of my brush and change the settings so that the brush is a bit harder, and I'm going to go back and draw in fine darker hair. Next, I'm going to go in and do the same thing but with a lighter tone. So I'm adding these really light hairs mostly where the highlights fall, so towards the center of each lock. Next, I'm going to go in and add more shadows around the face. But this time I'm going to be using a dark purple color to add the shadows because shadows usually pick up the colors in their surroundings. So I'm just going to increase my brush size a bit, make it really airbrushy, and add some purple shadows. Once I have the purple shadows added, I'm just going back in and blending everything together. Again, I use the Alt key to pick up the colors and blend them in together. Next, I'm going to be moving on to the eyes. So selecting a dark purple color, I'm just going to color in the iris of the eyes. Once I have that colored in, I'm going to be selecting an almost white, creamish color for the white part of the eyes. Now I'm going to go in with a darker purple shade and start adding shadows. I'm going to start off by adding the shadows of the eyelid and along the upper half of the iris. Now I'm going to blend in some of the shadows so that they don't have a harsh edge to it. Once I have that done, I'm going to go back in with a darker color and make the upper half of the iris a darker shade. Next, I'm going to select a lighter color and fill in the bottom half of the iris. And then I'm going to blend in where the two colors meet. Next, I'm going to be taking a finer brush and selecting a darker shade and drawing small lines going towards the outside of the iris and towards the center of the iris. Next, I'm going to do the same thing but with a lighter color. Now moving on to the lips, I'm going to start off by coloring the base color of the lips, and then I'm going to add the shadows towards the center of the lip, and then add the highlights and blend it all together. Next, I'm going to go ahead and do the necklace, the earrings, and the shirt. Now I'm going to be merging in some of the layers so that I have 2 layers in the end. Now I did this by color, so everything that had anything with purple on it on one layer and the skin tone on one layer. Once I have everything onto 2 layers, I'm going to create a new layer on top of the hair layer, create it as a clipping mask and setting it to overlay. And then using a light airbrush, I'm going to select a darker shade and just go over any of the dark areas where I added the shadows of the hair. And basically what this does is it's going to bring out some of the color. So it's going to make the darker areas a bit darker, and it's just going to give it an overall finished look. Once I have that done, I'm going to do the same thing for the skin. So I'm going to create a new layer, create a clipping mask and setting it to overlay. And then using a darker color skin tone, I'm going to go over the shadows that I did on the skin. Now I'm going back to the hair layer and doing the same thing with the highlights. Once I have that done, I'm going to merge the clipping mask layers to the layers underneath it. Now one of the final things I'm going to do is I'm going to go on to the line art layer, selecting the button that's next to the word lock, and I'm going to decrease the hardness of the black lines. So to do this, I'm going to pick colors around their surrounding and set it to the color of the lines. And finally, I'm going to go in and using a pure white color, I'm going to add in some very fine highlights in the eyes, on the nose, on the lips, and on the accessories. And there you have it, final product. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.